Go. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you guys could join us. I am so excited to introduce or, reintroduce, if you were here with us from the beginning of our virtual events, Tanaz Bhathena, who is joining us tonight. And Tanaz was actually our second virtual event last July for her fantasy Hunted by the Sky, and she has joined us again for the sequel to the book coming out, Rising Like a Storm. Yay! So here is her official bio. I just had to get that out of the way, Tanaz. I was very excited. All right. So Tanaz Bhathena writes books for young adults. Her latest novel, Hunted by the Sky, won the 2021 White Pine Award and was named the best book of the year by the CBC and USBBY, with the sequel, Rising Like a Storm. It just released today, actually. So we are like the launch event of it in the US. So excited. All right. And then her novel, The Beauty of the Moment, won the Nautilus Gold Award for Young Adult Fiction and was nominated for the 2020 White Pine Award. Her acclaimed debut, A Girl Like That, was named a Best Book of the Year by numerous outlets, including the Globe and Mail, 17, and the Times of India. Born in India and raised in Saudi Arabia and Canada, Tanaz lives in, oh my gosh, Tanaz, I'm going to totally pronounce this wrong. Mississauga, Ontario, with her family. I apologize to all the Mississaugians. You can connect with Tanaz on her website at tanazbhathena.com. All right, welcome, Tanaz. It is so great to have you back with us for Rising Like a Storm. We're so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be back, Marielle. It's wonderful because TBC was my first US launch event even last year. So this year as well, I'm doing it again for Rising Like a Storm. I'm so excited.
Yay, we're so excited. And just because I'm going to plug a lot, we have signed copies of both of Tanaz's books, guys. We, I think, are the only ones in the US that do. So unless you're going to Canada anytime soon, we are the best one for you. All right. So please, we still have lots of them left. There's still plenty left of signed copies. And I will tell you, she has not only signed each of them, she has also written a nice saying in both of them. And they are different sayings in the two books. I'm not going to tell you what they are because you're going to have to buy them to see. And it is awesome. So, all right, we are so excited. So let's just dive right in. So I know, obviously, you were with us for the release of Hunted by the Sky, which, in my opinion, you got a little shafted with that because of COVID, because it released in like May of 2020. So we're really pushing for these now. Come on, guys. But okay, so first off, let's talk about the ins and outs of the Wrath of Ambar duology. So for those who don't know, just tell us a little bit about both the books, Hunted by the Sky and Rising Like a Storm, and what was the initial spark that set you off on writing this series?
So, Hunted by the Sky and Rising Like a Storm are two books of a young adult fantasy duology set in a world inspired by medieval India. The story is about a girl named Gul who's prophesied to be the downfall of a tyrant king. When Gul's parents are murdered by the king's soldiers, she barely manages to escape and is rescued by a group of rebel women called the Sisterhood of the Golden Lotus, who train her in warrior magic. By the time she turns 16, Gul wants only one thing, and that is revenge. She eventually manages to infiltrate the king's palace with the help of a reluctant stable boy named Kavas, who has some dark secrets of his own. What Gul and Kavas don't realize, though, is that the palace has its own secrets, and that the bond between them is more than just a romance. The magic they realize together may be the only way to end their kingdom's tyrannical rule, and in Rising Like a Storm, they come across a new tyrant who's deadlier than any ruler they've ever known. So the initial spark for this particular book, or the series, really began with one sentence. In the kingdom of Umber, girls are disappearing. And I was thinking, why? And that's how the whole series began.
That is so cool. That is something that everyone should know. And also, if I mispronounce any of the characters' names, I'm very sorry. This is how I've been pronouncing them in my head for like the past year and a half. But that is so cool. I love that. I love that it started with a sentence. That's just, and like, it's like a two-parter with just one. That's so cool. So this kind of leads into that. So basically, as booksellers, we're always trying to find the best way to sell books we love to our customers. And you kind of already explained it a lot, but like, how would you sell your series to like excited readers? People like, just maybe you haven't heard of it before. Like, is there a specific way you would sell it? Would you just basically tell them that? What?
I would go for a really short elevator pitch. So if you like reading about one or more of the following: chosen ones, an enemies to lovers romance, fierce female warriors, magical creatures inspired by Indian and Persian mythology, cranky and murderous ghosts, then maybe you should read Hunted by the Sky and Rising Like a Storm.
If I didn't already love it, I would so be into that right now, especially with the cranky and cantankerous ghosts. That was so awesome. I am totally going to steal that the next time someone asks me about it. That is so cool. Because, you know how, like, the words, you have the words in your head, but until someone says them, I was like, cranky and cantankerous ghost. That's brilliant. All right. So now, what I want to know, because now you have both of these books are out. So was it always your intent to write this as a duology? Why, if so, why did you decide to do it this way?
So my initial idea was for this to be a trilogy, but the series sold as a duology, and I had to change things a great deal and rework the whole plot. I think, in general, there has been a shift from trilogies to duologies, mostly due to reader demand. I think, as a reader myself, I think that you have to wait a very long time between books in a series. So you have to wait a whole year. And that's a really long time. You forget what happens in the first book or in the previous books. And so with duologies, they make readers wait maybe a little bit less for the story to get finished. They tie everything neatly together in 2 books. And they're also more cost effective, I guess, on your pockets.
That's interesting because, yeah, I was wondering about that because I have seen a lot more duologies coming out in YA, like fantasy specifically. I've also seen a lot of standalones coming out in YA fantasy, which is very different because it was all, for so long, it was trilogy. So I didn't know I really was interested to know if you had always planned it as a duology or, as you said, planned it as a trilogy, but then, hey, they're like, hey, how about you make this a duology instead? And I think that is right. Why it's so prevalent is just because of that, because readers are impatient and they want their books now.
They do. They absolutely do. It's like they finish the first book and they're like, do I have to wait a whole year? And I'm like, I'm sorry. I don't decide that. The publisher does.
I know. It's like, I know. It's like, oh yeah. And then you got, like in the fantasy genre alone, you already have a lot of disappointed George R.R. Martin fans. I'm like, you might have to make your peace with the fact that the show Game of Thrones is just going to be the ending. Just make your peace with that and then move on.
Absolutely. I think I made my peace with that a long time ago.
I know, but see, it's so nice with yours because then I can tell people these are both the books. You will have the beginning and the end, and you don't have to wait. And it's all done. Totally. All right. So my next question is more crafty. For the writing craft, guys, because both of your books are told in like dual first person perspectives, and it's also told in present tense. Now, we kind of have a bit of a debate, I don't know, going on at the store regarding telling a story in first person and in present tense. I'm not going to tell you who's on what side, but I read a lot of YA, and some of us. Don't. But with actually, I have discussed this with them for actually like legitimate reasons. They have a hard time getting into a story that's in present tense because it kind of takes them out of it the way that they read. But most of YA is actually told in first person present tense. Like that is the general standard of YA. Not that all of the YA stories are like that, but most of them are. So why do you think that is such like it's almost like the standard of how to narrate and tell a YA? And why did you decide to write your story this way?
So first of all, I think that's a great question, and I sort of understand why there's a debate also going on at your store. So let me talk about myself. I generally pick the first-person perspective whenever I want the reader to feel really close to a character, or in a way exist in the character's head. I feel that when you write in the second or in the third-person perspective, it can create a bit of a distance. And what I really like about the present tense is how it gives the effect of events happening in real time, almost as if it's a movie. So when you combine both of these together, so first person and present tense, and you do it really well, it feels like you are living inside the story. And for this particular series, I really wanted the world and the characters to come alive, and that's why I chose the first person present perspective. Now, I don't know if it's to do with YA in general or a trend that sort of took off after these popular books like The Hunger Games, for example, which was written in first person present, started off the whole trend. I personally do not follow trends when it comes to writing. I treat narration for each story on an individual level. So for example, my first book, A Girl Like That, is written in multiple first-person perspectives, but everything is in the past tense. And the book that I'm working on now is in the third-person past. So it's like I always look at what feels most natural to me when I'm writing, and this may be very intuitive at times. It's not something that I really think about too much unless I see it on the page, and it's like, okay, now the story is flowing. So for me, it's not very intentional, but maybe it's a trend that has taken off in YA in terms of first person present. But yeah, we enjoy it, and that's why we write in it.
Yes. Actually, that is an awesome answer, because it is always important. It's like with writers, it's important to know the trends, and it's also important to know not to follow them. But because trends are just trends. But there is kind of, compared to other genres, I have seen in YA, it is a lot more first person, present tense. Some people, I disagree with this, and this is actually not anyone at the store. This is just in a general world view. They feel like, well, that's like taking the easy way out. And like, oh, well, teenagers don't have a good enough attention span. And I'm like, well, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the reason why. I think it's what you said, that is the way that the story, wrote for you. Like that was the best way to tell this particular story. And I think really that's what authors really do. It's like they're not necessarily trying to write in first person present unless it comes out that way, I guess, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And, it's really, you're also thinking about the character, because sometimes the character's voice doesn't come out right until you write in a particular perspective. So sometimes, like the book that I'm working on right now, I felt very comfortable writing in third person, in the past tense. I don't know why, but it just felt more comfortable that way. I'm a very intuitive writer in that sense. I don't really have a real, plan in that sense. I like to experiment. I like to play. And in terms of perspectives also, I wouldn't necessarily say it's taking an easy way out. It's also about knowing what works for your story and what you are comfortable writing in. Because definitely there are some perspectives which are more challenging. I can say that for myself, second person, which is like for readers who are not familiar, it is the voice that uses the you. For example, once upon a time, you were living in a faraway land. You entered a castle and saw a really hot prince, but then you saw his hotter sister and decided to get married to her. It's that kind of thing, that kind of narrative. So it feels unnatural to me. And it may feel that way because I'm not used to writing in it. But maybe it may be the case that one day I may write a book and the second person may feel the most natural to narrate this particular story. So it's like, or I may pretend that the reader is someone I am talking to. So that's when I will say, you may not be aware that this is what happened in my life or whatever, something like, so I'm mixing up perspectives right now, but it's that sort of thing. You don't really know until you start writing. And another very tricky voice is actually the omniscient third or the author sees everything voice. I don't know, for some reason I always have a hard time with that particular voice. I don't know why. It's like I haven't been able to get into the mindset of writing in the omniscient. I always feel like, it's like the author is God, and it's like I don't feel like God. It just feels weird to write from that perspective. So I'm definitely more comfortable in third person limited or in first person, and then past and present I've used both. I don't know if I can write a whole story in the future tense. That would be a challenge. That'd be interesting too.
I'm trying to think of any ones that are in the future tense only. Like that would be I feel as though that would be a hard sell, because I feel like it would. But so this is actually something I was just thinking of when you were talking about that. I think so. The reason I've honestly, I so never really noticed like whether the story I was reading was in present or past tense. And I think until like if I have to really focus, then I can kind of see it. And because, now I'm a bookseller and I'm actually the children's buyer at town now. So, that's how, so I can kind of see it, but when I read something, I don't notice it. And I think the reason might have something to do with the different ways people read. And like what you were saying with the first person present tense, it's like you're inside a movie. And that is how I've always read, though. Like whenever I read, in my brain, a movie starts playing of it. So that's probably why I don't mind the first person present tense, because I already do that anyway. But there are people that they don't read like that. Like their brain reads in a different way. And that might be another thing of why it's harder for some people to get into that, depending on the ways that you read. I just thought I was like, that is probably why I have never had a problem with first person present tense, because I already read like that. So yes, so that is, and you kind of already talked about this. Like, do you think it like, so, and it's like, you talked about like whether it was like the different challenges for each of the point of views already. But which one is easy? Like, so you've written in several different ones. Do you have one that was easier for you, or was it just, they were all kind of the same?
For me, definitely, the first and third are fairly like on any even playing field in terms of comfort level. I'm comfortable with both. I really do want to try the omniscient because I have a hard time with it. So I do really want to try it and make an attempt one day when I am not on contract and not on any deadlines, and just play around and experiment in omniscient, in futuristic tense kind of book or whatever, do whatever I want and not have to think too much about whether or not I'll be ever able to sell such a book. But it's more like, for me, it's a writing exercise, right? So there are so many books that begin with just an exercise in writing or just experimenting and having fun with sentences, playing with sentences. That's what we love to do as writers.
That's so cool. So, all right. So diving back into more specifically to, it's crafty, but it's also more specific to your books. Wonderful books that they are. So your fantasy world in this, it's like really amazing, and it's just the writing of it is so like, it brings it to such life, and your words are just like, oh, it's great. And so I like, it really came alive for me. So how were you able to craft this world that really just comes alive for the reader? And like, do you have any tips for like budding fantasy authors of how to go about creating their own worlds?
So first of all, thank you very much. That is very, very kind. I love the idea of setting in general, whether it's contemporary fiction or fantasy. I think it's very important for me that my stories are rooted in a sense of place. So when I read a book, I want to also step into a world that is alive, that feels like it exists, even though it may be a figment of someone else's imagination. And there are two tips that I can give, and these are tips that I follow myself while writing. And the first one is to focus on the 5 senses in your description, which is, sight, smell, touch, taste, and feel. These will make your setting more real and concrete, and also use descriptions that are unique to your character and your world, because then, if your character is like a murderer or whatever, and they can maybe talk about the metallic taste of blood or something on their lips or something like that, but you want to bring these senses alive for the reader. And this isn't something that you would necessarily do in your first draft. This is something that you would do in a second or a third draft when you're refining and when you're fleshing out the world. Another thing that I really like to do is I like to write my main character into a scene that's also a ritual very specific to that world. So this could be a birth or a death, a religious ceremony, or a celebration of sorts. And the scene may not even make it into your book. So for example, I had a short festival scene for this particular series that did not make it into either one of the books. I later took that scene and put it in another book, the one that I'm working on right now, but I don't think it'll make it in that book either. The one thing that I really like about writing this sort of scene, even if it doesn't make it into the final book, is that a ritual can tell you so much about the world. And, as writers, we tend to default. We tend to have a default on which sense we focus on the most. And I think for me, it's always the sight. So I'm always talking about how things look. But I often forget to talk about how things smell or touch or taste or feel, like the texture of wallpaper or something like that, or things like that, very, very unique little things. And but when you bring in these other senses and elements, that's when your world really begins to come alive. So I think it's really about just, living in the world yourself and imagining how you would feel. And then when you feel that you're immersed, the reader will also feel immersed.
That is awesome. Because yes, when I, ostensibly, I've taken a little break from writing right now, but I did write quite a lot, and I still try to every so often. Descriptions were always the hardest for me because either there were not enough of them, or I did way, way, way too much, and now it's weird. And you're right. A lot of it was, talking about how things look, because it's like, okay, but how do I get into that? So, like, another thing I was thinking, actually, so like you mentioned drafts and things that you've written but don't get in, just as like an idea of knowing for any like a budding writer that's listening who's like really struggling with like their second draft and what to cut and what to leave out. You said you wrote a scene that never made it into either book. How do you have do you know like how many like of scenes that you wrote but got cut in the end? Do you have like an estimate of that, of just, or like how many words you had to write? I'm sure it was a lot.
Let's put it this way. I wrote an early draft of the book that would become Hunted by the Sky, 50,000 words, and I trashed all of them almost. And I took pretty much only the first page of the first chapter and reframed the whole story from there. So typically that's what happens. You tend to write a lot and you tend to trash a lot. And then in the end, what ends up coming is really it's kind of like wine in a way. It matures, right? You're writing and the story takes time to mature. So maybe the first draft is going to be really horrible. It is going to be horrible. Let's just put it there. And the second draft may also be pretty, may not be that great. It's not until you are several drafts in that your story really begins to take shape. Your characters, which are more like one-dimensional or skeletal, begin to have real motivations. They begin to feel like real people. Because the first draft, you're always going to have to, it's always like your characters are running around trying to figure out what the story is along with you. And then you have to heighten their conflicts. You have to give them motivations. You have to really get into their heads. And as you're building the characters, you're also building the world. So for me, it's always like the setting is a character on its own. So whenever I like to see how my characters acts impact the setting and how the setting impacts them, or how the political atmosphere, how the history has impacted them. So you're thinking about the whole world and how it's moving along with your story. And it's really, really fun to play in that world. And so I think don't worry if it takes you a long time to get to the final product. I can tell you honestly that it can take a long, long time to write a book. I've spent 10 years writing a book. I've spent 5 to 6 years writing a book. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you have to come up with a story that really works well. And, people, they read books and they think, oh, okay, this author must have written it in maybe like a few months. And I say, I wish, because I'm not that fast a writer either. I take my time. I like to take my time. I like to think, because each sentence takes time as well sometimes, because you don't want to add cliches to a book. You want to change things around. And there's a lot that goes in there.
Yes. I did want people to know that. And that is so true of so many authors, I think. So if anyone is like out there and they're trying to write their first thing, basically just accept that your first draft is not going to be great and you're probably going to get rid of almost all of it, if not all of it, really. It's like, and it's okay. It's okay to do that. Just slice, make friends with the slicer. That's something I have to learn how to do. It's like, words are not precious, slice them out.
No, you don't need to slice them out. What you can do is that when you draft, what I like to do is that I draft one thing and then I know it's not going to work, so I take a copy of it. So I have that old draft saved away. So I'm not killing my darlings. I'm saving them. I'm keeping them in another folder so that in case I want something from there, I can just grab it and put it in the new draft. I think Scrivener is really helpful. I think a lot of writers are using Scrivener these days. I don't use it yet, but I've been hearing a lot about how you can use multiple drafts and you can refer to multiple versions of your story and then come back and forth. But yeah, you don't need to kill your darlings. Just cut them out and put them somewhere safe.
Somewhere safe now. Just it's like over there. It's like, all right. So I'm gonna skip around because I think this ties in more to what we were talking about on the questions. So like you were talking about in your world, like the political, the history. So it is like, I know in your books, these two, it is a fantasy world, but I do know that it's based on medieval India, correct? So basically, so what kind of research did you have to do to sort of put in those more historical elements to what is still a fantasy world?
So I did quite a bit of research on 15th and 16th century India, which was not even modern India as we know it today, but a region called Hindustan, and it was really the northern parts of India. The southern kingdoms were independent, and of the Mughal rulers at the time, they were the ones who had most of the kingdom or the empire of Hindustan under their control. And so this was like a period of sprawling labyrinthine palaces, elaborate courts, politics and drama, many warring kingdoms that rose and fell over a very short period of time. And for me, the research that I started off with really was with a TV series on the Indian historical figures called Bharatvarsh. And that was something that I watched on YouTube, and it's by APB News, and it was hosted by a well-known actor, Anupam Kher. And it was really, really fascinating to me because I saw all these great historical Indian figures from Ashoka to Chanakya and all these different men. And I'm like, where are the women? I was thinking about that. I was thinking that all of these great historical figures are all men. Where are the women hiding in this history? And so that's when I started researching even more. And I came across a book called Empress by Dr. Ruby Lal. So the book is about Noor Jahan, who was married to Mughal Emperor Jahangir. And the one fascinating thing about Noor Jahan was that she was the only Mughal empress to have coins minted in her name. And this was very rare at the time. And she had immense political power. She was also a literal badass. She hunted tigers. She rescued her husband when he was tricked into going into an enemy camp and he was captured. So she convinced all the army generals and she marched in with them as well. So she was really, really amazing. But of course, historians, male historians, would call her a temptress and a seductress and someone who was keeping her husband under control. But really, she was really, really fascinating and amazing. In southern India, we had these queens, the Untitled Ranis of Kerala, who literally led their armies into battle in, I think it was maybe the 11th to the 13th centuries, and they were really, really powerful. And there were so many other women who were relegated to footnotes in history when really they should have been at the forefront of it. And I think a lot of it has to do with colonization as well, because the British colonized India, and even today, history is told through that lens of colonization. So it was only the women that the British glorified who are in the limelight. So most people might have heard of Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, who was one of the foremost female figures in the in the First War of Indian Independence in 1857, the mutiny. And that was, mainly because she impressed the British by riding a horse herself, by leading an army of women and training them herself. She would ride a horse, and she would also, no, this is how she would ride her horse. So she'd hold the reins in her teeth. She'd have two swords, and she'd run and race into battle. That's how she would fight. So literally that's the image I had in my head when I was doing it. But she was not the only heroic figure in Indian history. There was Razia Sultana, who was the first female Indian Muslim ruler. There was also Chand Bibi, who defended Ahmednagar fortress against Emperor Akbar's Mughal forces. So there are so many of these women who we need to really look into. And even in terms of how they had political finesse and ambition. And if you even look at women like Zeenat Mahal, who was married to Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, who was the last Mughal, she really negotiated with the British to ensure that her family was safe. And she managed to do that, even though it didn't really work out really well for her family, but she was really, really smart, and she did so many things to keep her family safe. So we underestimate these women, and we underestimate the things that they had to do to stay in power and to really handle themselves in a very highly patriarchal society. So that was something that I was really playing around with. And I was thinking, what if this was a society that was egalitarian, or it started off as egalitarian and only became a patriarchy after a certain king took over the throne and was made a prophecy about a star-marked girl by his priests, and was told that, okay, a girl with a star-shaped birthmark will be your downfall. So what would happen then? And so that's how Hunted by the Sky started off. And it was that kind of thing and that kind of historical research that really drove me to write this story. Another fun fact that I can tell you is that the Sisterhood of the Golden Lotus, or the rebel woman group in this book, is inspired by a real-life group called the Gulabi Gang. So this is a welfare organization in North India, but it had vigilante roots. So women with gulabi or rose-colored saris would go from village to village defending other women, and they would teach them to fight. They would defend them against their, abusive in-laws or landlords or anything like that. And they were just literal badasses. And another thing, my main character Gul gets her name from the Gulabi Gang. So Gulab means rose, and I took that name Gul from there. And all the other sisters, with the exception of Amira, who's her own person and kind of awesome, are also named after flowers. So I was playing with that. I wanted to bring in these women who were not only wearing saris, but also wielding daggers and doing magic and fighting. And they're like, "You're going to come at me? You think I'm only going to wear a sari and, make rotis for you? No. I'm not going to do that anymore. Now I'll probably hit you with something." I just wanted to play around with that.
Oh, that is awesome. I love that. I love all that. That was all so great. And I know you kind of already said a few things, but now I'm I want to know more. So do you have any other recommendations of sources that, if someone's interested in learning more about, India or this time period or any of the awesome women you just talked about?
Yeah, you can actually go on my website, tanazbhathena.com/extras. So I have a list of links of articles, books, and TV shows that I actually listed that I used as reference. And it's not an extensive list, it's a short one, but it's still pretty exhaustive in terms of certain books that I've listed because they're pretty thick. So if you go through them and if you're really into Indian history, then you probably will be writing your own book on it,
That was all of that was awesome. I want all that stuff. That's so cool. Oh my goodness. So, we got a question from the audience that actually ties in with sort of one of mine that I was asking. So you've not only written, this is your first fantasy series, you've written other ones that were contemporary. So our question from the audience is actually from Kelsey, your publicist, actually, Kelsey at Macmillan. So what she's asking is, if your fantasy series characters met your contemporary book characters, which ones do you think would get along and be friends?
Oh my goodness. This is going to be interesting. I think Porus from A Girl Like That would probably get along with everyone except for Amira. Amira and Zarin from my first book, they would get along probably because they're both equally angry all the time. I think Susan from The Beauty of the Moment would be kind of the calming personality over there. Malcolm would probably get along. I think he's very good at getting along with people. Kavas, I think the guys in general, they would kind of get along. The girls would probably, initially they'd be suspicious of each other, and then they'd be like, you know what, we're kind of okay with each other too. So I think they would at some point get along, but there may be some, little hiccups here and there.
Little rivalries going on, maybe.
No, I think more personality clashes because or either they're too similar and then they'll clash as well. So
it's like you think they get along, they're so similar. Maybe that's the problem. They're just
the problem.
Similar. It's oh, that is awesome. Thank you so much for that question, Kelsey. Thank you for watching. So I also kind of wanted to know, why did you because you went from contemporary to fantasy, and it was a series because your other ones were standalones. Why did you decide to go into fantasy and also to, write a series? And which one, how did writing a series differ from writing your standalones?
So I always loved reading fantasy, but I never thought that I had the imagination to write one. As a child growing up in Saudi Arabia, I would read a lot of books, American books, about werewolves, witches, and vampires. And I would also watch a lot of Indian TV shows and on mythology and history. Usually it was on a satellite dish back in the day. And it was these satellite dishes were banned in Saudi Arabia initially. Then they allowed them or whatever. But then, when you're 13 years old, you don't really understand how you can combine these two loves that you have together. And you usually imitate what you read when you're writing. So for me, I imitated the books that I read by Western fantasy authors. And oftentimes my books would be weird because this was before the internet, people. So, and I didn't have access to libraries back over there. So I would whatever I got from the books, and it never felt right. And so I started writing more contemporary fiction. And it wasn't until I was much older and figured out how to combine my love for fantasy with my love for Indian mythology and history that everything started clicking and falling into place. In terms of the second part of your question, writing a series is always harder than writing a standalone because you really need to plan a series in advance. It's difficult to maintain a story's momentum over the course of 2 or more books, and this is really important because your story needs to have a beginning, middle, and an end, but each of your books also needs to have a beginning, middle, and end, and that's why it's tricky because each book should feel like a complete novel in itself, but at the same time, the larger story should also feel like it's a complete picture of the story that you're trying to tell, that is.
Yes, that is, I know, yeah, because, you're right. With the series, you always have to be thinking about, okay, this has to be a complete book. but it also has to tie in with the next book. That is awesome. So that, in a way, sort of segues into my next question. When you're saying that, when you were writing, like, originally when you were a kid, you were writing fantasy from what you were reading, which was, like, Western fantasy stuff. And you couldn't really figure out how you were going to, combine that with, like, Indian mythology and history. So that kind of gets into the whole diverse books on the shelves thing, which is, like, so important for all, and all that is very important, especially for us at Town. We really, really we actually actively look for that. So to make sure we have all voices on our shelves. So my question for you is, in this regard, what would you like to see people take away from your book? And then what are some other, like, diverse books you would like to see more in bookstores? They can be books that either exist right now that you know of that maybe you want to see in bookstores more, or maybe books or like stories that haven't really been told, but you'd like to see them.
So for me, I had a lot of fun writing this series, okay? And I just want my readers to have fun as well. So I want them to enjoy the ride and go along on an adventure with these characters and explore and discover parts of India and Indian culture that they're not familiar with. So it's just something that I really loved writing about, and I wanted to share my love for something that I'm very familiar with other people, whether they're Indian or not. And I want them to enjoy that. And I would also love to see more books by Indian fantasy authors who are living in India, because what they're doing over there is very different from what Indian fantasy authors are doing in North America. And I feel like authors like Sukanya Venkatraghavan, who wrote Dark Things, which is like a really cool Hindu mythology-based story that takes place in the underworld. And it's really, really fun and fascinating, and it's really interesting. There is another series called the Aryavata Chronicles by Krishna Udaishankar, and that series is about Lord Krishna, but a historical reimagining of the mythology and of him, and he's like reimagined as a general leading an army, and she adds all these political layers to ancient India that you never really thought about, and she's put in so much research into this series. It's amazing. And then there's Anand Neelakantan, who wrote the story of the demon king Ravan from the great epic Ramayana, and he's written from Ravan's perspective. It's called Asura, and it's so really fascinating to see this, because Ravan is usually categorized as a stereotypical villain in Hindu mythology, and so it's really fun to see the anti-hero story, right? So it's like you want to see all these various different unique perspectives on Hindu mythology, which I don't think you can get here right now in North America. And whenever I want to read these books, I ask friends and family back in India to send them to me, because it's so hard to get them sometimes, even on websites and stuff like that. It's really tough.
That is so cool. That is not something I've ever thought about. But yeah, it would make sense that fantasy writers who are actually like living in that country, like for example in India, would obviously have a different perspective on fantasy for that. And that is so cool. I gotta look into that. I don't know if we can get some of those books, but I'd love to get them into the store. Those sound like awesome things. I want to read them. I'm going to have to go find some friends who live in India for them to send me those books.
or you can get some of them on Kindle now too, Yeah. So that'll be easier probably.
Easier. Yeah. Although I would love to have some friends in India. That would be fun. But, so that's really cool. So this is also kind of another thing that I did want to talk about. Because I think it's important. So there's something that's still, I feel, is still too little known by the reading public at large, is that for a long time, there was a big thing with publishers, and they would not print covers with non-white faces on them, which even if the story was about non-white people, they would not put non-white faces on covers, which I think so many people don't realize that is very upsetting to me, that so many people don't realize that there was a very big, like, they would maybe publish the story, but they refused to put any non-white face on a cover, which was I think people should more know about that. So both of your books feature your main character in her, obviously she is, obviously it's based on medieval India. So she looks Indian and just beautiful. And she's just a young, beautiful brown girl. And it makes sense because, that's what the world is based on. So why do you think it is so important for everyone, especially like kids and teenagers, to see themselves not just in the stories they read, but on the covers of them as well?
This is a great question. So thinking back, as a child, I always thought that books were a window into a world where I could not exist. It wasn't until I was 16 and I was reading Tales from Firoz Shah Bagh by Ruined Mystery that I felt like a mirror had been held up to my face. And I was surprised and thrilled to find a book about someone like me, an Indian Zoroastrian, and that too one written with authenticity and humor. And I did not know what I was missing in my reading until that time, or why I was moving away from young adult fiction to adult. And now things are changing, and YA is becoming a lot more diverse, as you mentioned, which I really love. And I also love how you talk about the covers, because I know of a reader who actually mentioned after seeing the covers how she felt good about the way she looked, because she looks a little bit like Gul. And so it's so important to portray kids of color not only inside, but also on books, looking beautiful, strong, and happy. Because we need to remind people that our stories don't always end in tragedy, and that we too can be heroes.
Yes, I love that. I love that you mentioned that reader was saying how she felt like that is. Oh, I love that. I love that story. It's beautiful. And I so want more more kids especially, to see that. And I always say like with things, like the saying of you can't judge a book by its cover is true for everything except books. Because it's very important, I feel, to have an accurate representation of the story on the book, which is I always like covers that are like this, where it shows very authentically them, and so everyone can see themselves, not just in the stories, but on the covers, which is just fantastic. Thank you. That was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I'm sorry, guys.
It's okay, and thank you so much. Shout out to Beth Clark at Macmillan, who's genius, and she designed these covers, and she designed all my covers, so special shout out to her.
Yes, thank you. Oh, yay. All right. So that well, that was wonderful. And then, so here, jumping back into more about, like other books. So fantasy, whether we're talking young adult or just, adult fantasy books, and really there's a lot of crossover between the two when it comes to readers. Fantasy just attracts very voracious readers, and we're always getting requests for recommendations from customers. They blew through one series and now they want another one, and they want something that's the same, but they want it different and all that stuff. So do you have any recommendations for people after they've blown through your awesome fantasy duology?
Rick, I would definitely recommend the Tiger at Midnight trilogy by Swati Teerdhala. It's a wonderful series based on ancient India, and it gives you a very unique perspective as well, because Swati is from the south of India, and she uses all these different elements that you don't usually see in more North Indian inspired mythology or fantasy books. And also I would recommend Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri, which is also another Mughal India inspired adult fantasy novel, and it's, I think, the first in a duology, and the duology is more like companion novels, so both can be read as standalones. But yeah, these are two really great authors that you should look into, and they write wonderful books.
Yes, I know we do have the Tiger at Midnight in the store right now, guys. So just a little thing you might want to know. Because I thought that was such a cool book. I'm like, yes, we're bringing this in. This is going to be awesome. And it is. So this kind of also ties in with that. So at the store, we have a section, if we call it Department 22, or if you like this, try that. So what books, if we had you up on we have one of your books up on the shelf, what other books would you want to see like alongside yours on your, if you like this, try that shelf?
So if you liked Hunted by the Sky, try Sisters of the Snake by Sarina and Sasha Nanwa. So this book just released on June 15th, and it's about twin sisters who have snake familiars, and it's really, really fun. It's also India-inspired fantasy, and it's a lot of fun. It's a funny fantasy, which is very, very rare with fantasy. You rarely find funny fantasies, and this is really fun.
That is awesome. I got an arc of that book before it came out. I absolutely love that book. We have it in the store right now, guys, so you can get Tanaz's books and that one. So then you'll just be stocked up for, like, depending on how fast you read, it could be really quick or really slow, but still awesomeness. Yay. Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that one, because yes, you're right. Funny fantasies are sometimes hard to find because they tend to go, a lot of them have been going a little dark. So this is nice. But it's fun. Snake familiars. Come on, guys. How can that not be good? But anyway, so we're getting close to the end here, guys. So if anyone else has any questions out there, just type them into the comment section. But Tanaz, is there anything new you're working on that you'd like to share with us, or that you're allowed to share with us?
I can't say too much about it right now because I'm in the middle of a major rewrite, but it's also YA fantasy in the same universe as the Wrath of Umber series, but a different kingdom and different characters.
Oh, yay. I'm so excited. Now I'm like super excited. I want that. I don't know what it is, but I want it. Read one of her books, guys, and you'll want it too. Just putting that out there. All right. So, then my last question for you is just, well, I always like to ask this when we wrap up. What is one of the most recent books you've read and enjoyed? And then I also added an extra one. So what was your favorite book as a teenager? And
okay, so as a teenager, I used to read a lot of R.L. Stine. So Fear Street and Fear Street sagas were my jam. I also read a lot of Sweet Valley. Sorry, it's a guilty pleasure still. I like trashing those books now, but I still love them as well because it's like, it's nostalgia, I mean, it's just nostalgia for those books. I also loved The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. I first read it when I was 16 years old, and it was part of an English project, and I just fell in love with that book for its writing, and I still love that book today. I think it's one of the best books that I've ever read. More recently, I'm slowly reading, or rather I'm savoring, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, and that book is really such a great fantasy. I feel like it's on another level altogether. It's about it's inspired by pre-Columbian history, and it's really, really wonderful. It's just so fascinating. The characters are so well drawn. They're all so, they feel real. Like, you feel like these people exist. And it's so hard to do in a fantasy that you feel that, oh, these people are living in this world, and I want to go back and dive back into that world. So it's that sort of book.
Oh, that is awesome. So yeah, we also have that book too, guys. So you can get we should just have a Tanaz's favorite bookshelf, Tanaz. It's like, yes, these are all the ones that she talked about and she likes, and you'll love them too. And you'll also love her books. So just to wrap up again, now we're wrapping up here, guys. And I just want to put in another plug. We have Hunted by the Sky in paperback, which just released at the end of May in paperback. And it is signed and wonderful. And then we also, obviously, it just released today, the Rising Like a Storm, the sequel and conclusion of the series, which is also signed by Tanaz, and it is wonderful. And we have them both at the store. You can come into the store. You can order them online. You can pick them up curbside, pick them up in the store. We can even ship them to you. So please come buy the books, and we will just, they're just so good. Everyone should read them. And so, Tanaz, thank you so much for being back here with us for the launch of Rising Like a Storm. And I've just had so much fun with you tonight.
Same. I just loved being back and talking to you and, just diving back into this discussion of world building and craft and just writing fantasy in general. It's so much fun.
Yay. All right. Well, guys, thanks so much for being here with us tonight. See ya.
Bye.